My friend, Dr. Ken Hay, went to be with the Lord in 2019. He was one of the founders of the Wilds Christian Camp, and he loved teenagers. And I think probably it was back maybe 2004 or 2005, he preached here at our church on a Sunday. He was just, he loved churches and he loved God's people. And one of my fondest memories of Dr. Hay was standing outside of a golf club in South Carolina underneath a huge umbrella while it was just pouring buckets of water down from the sky. It was pouring down rain. And I was in my early 20s, and it was the day of the Wilds golf tournament. It happens every year about this time of year. And during my mid-20s and into my early 30s, I went every year. It was my favorite day of the year. I liked it more than Christmas Day. I would rather have gone to that tournament. It was just fun to be around all those Christian people playing golf, and my team usually came in pretty good anyway. I think we came in second one year. And one year we got last place, so that was also fun. But on that day, as we were in the parking lot and we were driving up to where Dr. Hay was standing underneath the umbrella, we got up close and he motioned us over, and we drove up close to him and slightly cracked the window, and he leaned over so that we wouldn't get rain in our car with his umbrella. And this is what he said. He put his hand up toward the sky and he said, "We can't control the weather." In fact, he said it kind of like this: "Can't control the weather." Kind of this old, he had this old sound to his voice. So, of course, he was always old to me growing up. And I think there's no truer statement than that. You can't control the weather. But it's really disappointing when you've been looking forward to this day for months, and to get to this day and you walk outside and it's just pouring down rain. And you know there's no way that we're going to play golf. In fact, I don't even know why we bothered going to the golf course, because there was no way we were going to play golf. God sends rain upon the earth according to His wishes and according to His purposes. And of course, we didn't golf that day, and it was a disappointment, but it was God's plan for our day. But I wonder if we kind of look at life like rainy days. On the one hand, you can see them as just part of life. That's the way Henry Wadsworth Longfellow saw it when he wrote his famous poem, "The day is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary." Of course, he was in England, and I think in the middle of the summer it's that way. "The vine still clings to the moldering wall, and at every gust the dead leaves fall, and the day is dark and dreary." And you just see a nice, beautiful summer day in England, right? Where it's pouring down rain and it's kind of cold, and there are still some dead leaves on a vine and they're falling to the ground. And the walls are even crumbling under the humidity. It's just really wet. But then Longfellow took it as an illustration of life. And he wrote this: "My life is cold and dark and dreary. It rains and the wind is never weary. My thoughts still cling to the moldering past, but the hopes of youth fall thick in the blast, and the days are dark and dreary." Kind of sees life like a rainy day, doesn't he? He looks at his life and he says, my life's a lot like today. And you almost get the sense that he's depressed. He must be really down, because he's looking at this rainy day and he's saying, well, isn't this the perfect picture of my life? This is exactly how I've lived. It's just like this. But then he ends with this statement, hoping to cheer you up. Here's how he ends. And then you'll say, oh, I know this. This sounds familiar. He says, be still, sad heart, and cease repining. Behind the clouds, the sun is still shining. Thy fate is the common fate of all. Into each life some rain must fall. Some days must be dark and dreary. But if you consider what Longfellow is thinking, is it really true that we should say rain is just a part of life, get used to it. I'm talking about as an illustration of life. Get used to be upending by the rainy storms of life. Get used to life just having those kinds of days. After all, your fate is the common fate of all. Some days are just going to be dark and dreary. You see, the key word there is fate. Fate. That was Longfellow's antagonist. It's the mystery of life. It's the principal character working against you behind the scenes, and you're powerless to stop it. Longfellow, if he had been golfing with us that day, would have said, of course, today would have to rain. I mean, why would you have thought it would be different into each life? It's just fate. Well, I don't see life like that, and I'm telling you, you should not either. The Bible reveals that there is something quite different from fate working behind the scenes. Sometimes even working out in the open before your eyes, and I'm going to call that providence. God is the one who in turn directs our lives in His plan according to His goals. And on that rainy day, God was controlling the weather. In fact, I have no doubt that before that day, there were many people at the Wilds, good Christian people, praying for the Lord to give a good weather day. But God had other plans. He sent the storm water to drown out a tournament that day like He has been doing for centuries, and He continues to do at this very hour. So who controls your career? I mean, a missed golf day's inconvenient. But when your career gets turned upside down, that's really a rainy day, isn't it? Who controls your health? Do you really think you can prevent yourself from getting cancer or having a heart attack, from dying? You can control that? You think science is going to come up with some pill to fix all of that? You really believe that? Who controls or protects your children? Who watches over them? I mean, who controls your safety when you're driving down the highway? Or who directs the nations of the world and their leaders? And really, who even oversees the food that you eat? I know there are things you can do, and perhaps you can influence some of those outcomes. Certainly, you can put God to the test. Go stand in the middle of the Dan Ryan Expressway in Chicago, one of the busiest highways in the United States, and see what happens on a Friday evening. I mean, those Chicagoans will drive you over and not think twice. They'll be happy to knock your body off to the side of the road. Seriously, they will. And that's just kind of the way those folks think. I mean, you can go down to the mall and lick the doorknobs, okay? You can put God to the test, but it doesn't change who's in control. It doesn't alter who's really controlling everything. When I get into trouble, when I wonder what to do, the choices become clear. I can either trust in God or fate. I can either say, God controls all these things, or some blind force is just working out there, controlling these things, and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm telling you, friends, if you know Jesus as your Savior, if you follow the Word of God, you have no choice but to believe this truth, that God is directing our lives according to His plan. And Psalm 121, the psalmist directs our attention to his response to life's difficult situations. After commenting about his own faith, he then turns, and most of the psalm encourages his reader, that's us, to trust in God like he does. He wants us to trust in our Creator God to keep us safe. Would you consider number one? God is helper to His own. God is helper to His own. Now the psalmist begins by longing for the safety of home. I will lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. He's singing this song likely in a foreign land, and you get this sense that he is experiencing life, things outside of his control. He can't deal with it. He's looking for help. This implies that he's in trouble. Can you identify with that? Have you been in situations where life is just kind of outside your control? You can't do anything to change the outcome. You have to try something, but you don't know what to do because life's just beating you down. That's the psalmist. And he says, I look to the hills. A testimony to his faith in God. Because here's what he's saying. This is what I will do. I will look to God. As a people, remember, the Jewish people sang this song as their testimony of their faith in God. These are songs of ascents, a songbook the Jews sang on their return to Jerusalem for the 3 yearly festivals. It gives, if you remember, the previous psalm gave us the impression that these pilgrimages were from far away from Jerusalem. And so the hills that he's looking at are toward Jerusalem. He's looking at home and he's longing for the safety of Jerusalem, the place where God had established a name for himself, Mount Zion, the holy hill of God. He's looking at that place where the temple either was standing or once stood. And he's longing, saying, in my time of trouble, in my time of difficulty, I'm looking toward Zion because that's where God is, because God is the only one who can help me. God is helper to his own. Because safety is from the Creator. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. It's not from some governmental agency. It's not from some corporation. It's not even from some community activism. My help comes from God who made all things. God is the one who provides protection in trouble. He is the one to whom we turn in times of need because he provides that safety for us. Don't trust in anything else. Don't have confidence in anything else. My confidence is in God alone. And I love the way one commentator wrote. He said, this confidence in the Creator God is primary, personal, wise, and immeasurable. I am saying everything is placed on God because he alone has power to help us. Friends, he made everything. There is nothing that you can see that God did not create. Now, there are artists who sculpt what God created into their own artistic piece. And we say, look what he made. You look at a building, you say, look at the building he built. We use that to understand that people are taking the tools that God created and arranging them in a certain way. And that's fine. But you understand that everything that's being arranged is God's ultimately. God made the mountains. God made the trees. He made the water. He made the universe, the sky. He made the animals and the plants. He made everything. God created it all. And I believe that one of the serious flaws in so many Christians' thinking today is that we have been influenced by evolution to the point where we do not, in our hearts, have it nailed down true that God made it all, that he created it all. And you talk about the things you can see, you should then talk about the things you can't see. I was at the Creation Museum a few years ago in Kentucky, and we had a speaker from some college somewhere who was there for the summer doing presentations, and he had gone out to the lake right beside the museum, and he'd taken some water out of the lake down by the river, the lake bed, and he had put it on a slide, and he put it under a microscope, and so that we could all see all of the little creepy, crawly things that we drink in our water. And it was a little bit disturbing. And some of the things were still, and he said, oh, that's the shell of some little creature, and he had a name for it. Some little creature. And he said, by the way, toothpaste, he says, the scientists gather up all these little shells, and they put them in your toothpaste, and that's what provides the grit. You don't even really feel it on your teeth, but it's microscopic. But it's what's grinding away the dirt and filth on your teeth. He said, so it's a good thing. But I'm thinking, I've got all the little bodies of these little creatures that I'm putting on my teeth. That's not going to encourage me to brush, okay? And then he moved the slide down and something slithered past. Now that's disturbing. But God made all of those things. You can't see them. Down to all the little viruses, all the little flu bugs, all the smallest things. God made all of them. He created all of it. And man can't control it. We can try to arrange it like we build a building. We can try to put pieces together, and science has done some pretty wonderful things in helping modern life be different than ancient life was. Some of those things are a real blessing. But you can't control it because it's not ours. It's His. God made it. And He, as a concerned creator, provides protection in trouble. You see, fate is not our guardian. I was searching YouTube last night, and I understand what happens when you go down the YouTube rabbit hole. A few years ago, I was sick with strep throat. This is probably 10 years ago, or maybe a little less. YouTube had just come out. And Becky took the kids out, and I was at home in front of our computer, wrapped in a blanket. And I was just going through one YouTube song after another, after another, after another. And she got home, and I said to her, kind of not trying to use consonants, because that hurts your throat when you have strep throat. So I'm just kind of using all vowel. YouTube is the greatest invention in the history of mankind. This is what I told her. She will affirm that. This is unbelievable what you can find on here. It's amazing. So last night I was scanning YouTube because I had in the back of my mind that there was a country song that Garth Brooks sang that was going to fit this. And so I said, I'm going to find it. So I went searching YouTube for this, and it took me a while, and I found it. And I found a live concert that Garth Brooks was doing in Minneapolis, where there's a woman who had cancer. She had had chemotherapy that morning. She was down near the front holding a sign, chemo this morning, and Garth Brooks tonight, or something like that. And she was holding up this sign. And the song Garth Brooks was singing is the one he said at the beginning of the song, he said, this is my favorite Garth Brooks song, called The Dance. And the whole theme, and some of you know it, and you're looking at me like I'm crazy. You're still looking, I know you know this. The theme was, our lives are better left to chance. And I'm looking at this going, how empty, how lost. Here's this woman who's had chemotherapy saying, my life's just left to fate. I'm hoping for the best. I was grieved watching this, really grieved. I was trying to fight back tears because I was thinking how sad all of these people are who believe this. And then in some weird world, he saw the sign, he went down, he sat down with this woman, they sang that line together, our lives are better left to chance. He gave her a hug, he gave her his guitar, he then stood up, he said something about, this is evidence that God exists. And I'm thinking, well, that's opposite of what you just sang. And then he walked off the stage with his head held high, almost in an arrogant, pompous sort of way. It was a weird strut that he had leaving. And I sat there last night looking at my iPad thinking, that's about as empty and backward as I've ever seen. God is the one who helps his own. Friends, that's why I'm thankful. If you don't believe that, you won't be thankful. That's why I believe in answered prayer. That's why I'm just so thankful when God answers my prayers. That's why when things work out as blessing, I say, thank you, Lord, not thank you, Matt. And yes, when somebody else is a blessing to me, I say thank you to them. But ultimately, I'm thanking God because he's the one who provided for me through them. That's why I'm thankful. That's why I'm cheerful. Because my times are in God's hands. My life is in his hands. And nobody protects people better than God. If you really believe differently, then I'm sorry for you. If you really believe that it's just chance and it's just fate and that Walt Disney's right, because they've completely swallowed this lie. And they put it in all the kids' songs. If you really believe in karma and what comes around goes around and all of these lies that have just completely rooted in our culture, then I'm sorry for you, but I'm going to tell you something. God is the one who helps me. And because I believe that, it leads me to my second point. We must trust him to help us. I have to trust him because God is our guard. He keeps us safe. Do you see the word keep there? Or keepeth, if you've got the 1769 King James edition, got that ETH. You see keep? If you also look down, there's a transition there in verse 7 to the word preserve. That's the word keep again. I don't know why the translators didn't stay with the word keep. Maybe they just wanted to have a different word that would make it interesting. But they went from keepeth to preserve. But it's the same word, shamar. God keeps us. He preserves us. And it's used 6 times. 3 times as keep and 3 times as preserve between verses 3 through 8. And the examples you can give are amazing. You go back and trace this word. This is the word of the cherubim guarding the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve were expelled. They were guarding it. They were keeping it, preserving it. You can't come in. It was the person that David left in charge of his sheep when he went to visit his brothers who were fighting Goliath and the Philistines in 1 Samuel 17. This man was guarding the sheep. He was preserving the sheep. And if you read through the psalm, you see this idea. It's just all through. It saturates the psalm. In verse 3, God will not suffer. In verse 3, God is the one who keeps. In verse 4, God keeps Israel. The Lord is thy keeper, verse 5. The Lord is thy shade, verse 5. He shall preserve, verse 7. He shall preserve thy soul, verse 7. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and coming in, verse 8. Every time the psalmist looks at all this, he says, God's the one doing it. Friends, this is why David was able to go and pick up some stones and put them in his pocket and run at a man 3 times his size, holding a spear that was heavier than he was. Because you have defied the God of heaven, and he will defeat you on this day. God was the one keeping him. God, verse 3, will not let you be moved. This is almost like a wish. The psalmist is saying, okay, God, don't let them be moved. Let God never let you be moved. He's praying this out, saying, if these people would only come to understand this, come to realize, letter B, that your protection is complete. In God, he protects you. He will never let your foot be moved. He that keeps you will not sleep. He will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade. The sun can't smite you. The moon can't smite you. The Lord preserves you from all evil. He preserves your soul. He preserves your going out and your coming in, just your everyday life. even forevermore. God guards in unbroken care. There's never a time when he's looking away. Never a time when something escapes his notice. My friends, Jesus said, do you want to know how much value you have? More than many birds, and he sees when the little bird falls. He even numbers the hairs on your head. He keeps count, which is just a really weird statistic, in fact. God knows every single little thing about you. He never loses notice. His attention is continual. You know, it reminds me of Elijah standing there facing off to the prophets of Baal in 1 Kings. And there, the prophets of Baal are cutting themselves, and they're chanting, and they're crying out all day for their pagan god to hear them. And do you remember what Elijah says? Maybe he's sleeping. You need to call out a little louder. Maybe your God just fell asleep. Our God doesn't fall asleep. He doesn't need rest like man. He stays awake and he watches over us. And God guards us in unbroken care in every circumstance. I think when he mentions the sun and the moon, he's not intending the sun to be an enemy and the moon to be an enemy. This idea of personification of enemies is a possible interpretation. The pagans certainly saw the sun and moon to have powerful properties that influence life. But I think rather when he says sun and moon, he just means all day and all night. He's just saying all the time. You go to bed at night and the moon's out. You get up in the morning and the sun's coming up. Or however it is you go to bed. Some of you go to bed the other way. You go to bed when the sun's out and get up when the moon's still up. But when you have these days and nights and this rhythm of life, and the sun and the moon is kind of a constant in your world, right? And God's saying, it's just constant. I'm with you all the time. Unbroken care. He watches over us in every circumstance, providing shade for his people, a protection in every situation that nothing can harm us outside of God's plans. I look back on my young adulthood, and I can tell you there were probably 6 or 8 times where I could have easily gone to be with the Lord because of foolish decisions that I made. Really dumb, stupid choices. Really bad. I mean, you would be surprised if I told you. You'd say, really? You did that? Yes. That bad, that dumb. And afterward could just say, it was just God protecting me. And probably you can say the same. You might have some similar examples. If you've ever driven your car over 100 miles an hour, then you fall into that category, okay? You do. I'm sorry, that's stupid. You don't know what kind of crazy person's out there on the road in front of you, also driving 100 miles an hour. And I can think of all of those times where God's unending care was there taking care of me, protecting me. He watches over in every circumstances and guards in unbroken care and blesses in unending care. Verse 8, the going out and coming in represent the affairs of life. God protects me on my way to the office. He protects me while I'm there. He protects me on my way home. He's just watching over me. When lightning struck the tree that used to be out beside my office window, it was this flash of light, this loud explosion, and I saw bark, pine bark, just go everywhere. It was all over the side of the office building. I walked outside, and it was all over the car. The white car had turned brown with pine bark, just absolutely covering it. And I looked at the pine tree, and it really didn't look good. It looked like somebody had taken a giant had taken his fingernail and just pulled all the way down from the top of the tree all the way down to the bottom. And lightning had struck that tree. And that could have been just a few feet over. That could have been me. God was watching out for me. God was taking care of me. He blesses in unending care in the affairs of life. He watches over us as you go about your business, paying attention to your mundane day-to-day affairs. When you go into that restaurant and the letter grade is a D-, God's taking care of you, even when you make dumb decisions. When you live your life, We get so calloused to it. We just forget. How many times on the road where somebody had just turned a half second earlier or a half second later, or how many times you're not paying attention at the green light, where you get the honk from the car behind you, but the one time you're glad because somebody ran the red light and that would have been you, T-boned in the middle of the intersection. God's just watching out, just unbroken care. He's taking care of you. It never ends. It never ends. From this time forth forever, he says, God will always watch over you. This promise in the Psalms is given to the Jews specifically. Now, I want to temper what I've just said by saying this, by application. Does this mean every individual Jewish person can claim this psalm to the point to say nothing will ever go wrong in life? No. Because God does allow things to go wrong in life, and ultimately we know the end of life is death. And you can't just try to somehow in your mind say, but God promised He'll always take care of me, and if I die, He's not taking care of me, so I'm not going to die. You know that makes no sense, and you have to temper passages like this with other passages of Scripture which give you a firm grasp of what God is saying. But if you really want to understand the teaching here, I think the point of the psalm is not that there will be no trials or troubles. Rather, it's that God is always caring and always watching, and whatever happens is in accordance to His plan and will for us. So when I ask the question, who really controls your career? The answer is God does. So you studied typewriter repair in college. Okay? God changes your career. That's okay. He uses that situation to change you to be more like Jesus Christ. Who controls your health? Again, God does. It doesn't mean you're going to live forever. Sin brings death, and we're all sinners, so you do the math, right? But it does mean we're still under His care in health situations. Who protects your children? And my answer is, I hope no one other than God. God's the one watching out for them. Who controls your safety in traffic? I'm telling you, it's not Tesla. Okay? Who directs the nations of the world? Well, God has given Satan certain powers over the nations. And certainly that's why we see so many terrible things. But ultimately, it's still God's domain. And even who oversees the production of food that you eat, that's still God. Because you have these giant farms and all they're doing is planting and watering and waiting for the sun to do its magic, right? That's God, all of that. All of that's God. God does all of it. Life isn't about fate. It's not about some days being sunny and some being rainy. Longfellow was wrong. It's about living in a world that God has made for His own glory, and there will be rainy days. But it doesn't mean for a moment that He stopped paying attention. Now, if I could be Longfellow's friend, in conclusion, I would have directed him to a different poem written by another Englishman named William Cowper. It's spelled C-O-W-P-E-R. This looks like Cowper, and he's written about 65 hymns. Many of them are interhymnal. But William Cowper was friends with John Newton, the man who wrote Amazing Grace. In fact, John Newton was probably his discipler, if you want to think of it that way. Newton was a man who really helped Cowper. Cowper was a man who suffered horrible depression. He really struggled with depression to the point where he would have dreams and believe in his dreams that God had told him, you are damned and I've given up on you. He would dream this way, and it would just throw him into these horrible depressions. And Newton tried to help his friend. He counseled his friend. He would take him out on his visits to families, and that meant doing long walks through the English countryside, and they would walk together. And Cowper would, from time to time, in deep depression, try to take his own life. And Newton stood beside him in all of those attempts and tried to help him. And then he would come out of it and realize that God was good. And then he would write some really good songs, and then he would go into depression again. It was just this cycle. And in the last hymn that he wrote that was published is a hymn that we don't actually have in our hymnal, and I'm so disappointed. And it's not there because the wording is so tight that it's kind of hard to sing. If you go on YouTube and you type in Josh Bauder, B-A-U-D-E-R, you'll find his group out of Minnesota singing this hymn, and it's beautiful with orchestration. God moves in mysterious ways, His wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable mines of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. Ye Christian saints, you saints, all of us here, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and will break with blessings on your head. I say, let it rain. Let it rain. Let it rain. Let's pray. Our Father,